Ciarán, thank you so much for joining us again. It's been a little while. We had Thanksgiving here in the States, and I know you've been super busy traveling all around. Really grateful to you for making the time today. Welcome back.
Yeah, and it's great to be back, and a happy Thanksgiving. And can you just see, Americans seem to push a lot of these holidays together. I mean, you just out of Thanksgiving, and then you're suddenly into Christmas, so it's
right on the heels of Halloween. It is quite a rush, a blur, and New Year's after that.
Yeah, and I'd just like to pay tribute and thank the people who helped us on the last trip we've done with myself and Red Fire, where we were in Washington, New York, Albany, and Chicago, and particularly people from the AOH and LAOH who hosted events, and we were allowed to speak to, and the people in Chicago who hosted a hunger strike commemoration. So it was great to be over, great to meet with activists, and great to first touch in Washington post-elections. And the good news from that was that the bipartisan approach from both the Republicans and the Democrats will continue in relation to Ireland and our peace process and progress.
Yeah, it was a successful trip by every count. And if anyone's listening or watching and is not subscribed to our newsletter, please be sure to do that. You can stay in touch with all of the latest breaking news and analysis and events in your area. All of that is part of what we put out weekly. We're hoping to dive into some hot topics of late today to learn a little bit more about what role Irish Americans might play, and just to get a deeper understanding of all that's going on. If it's all right, I'd like to start with the issue of legacy. There's a legacy bill that is continuing to make its way through the British government. To review, this is a bill that, if passed, would close down all judicial investigations into killings during the conflict, and any outstanding inquests, and block victims' families to access in courts and the entire judicial system. It's a move that was opposed by every party in the North, as well as the Irish government, and would be a violation of the European Human Rights Commission and international law. It's on second reading in the House of Lords, and there was a proposal to modify this bill to undo an important part of the Good Friday Agreement, a section that all parties agreed to, saying that anyone found guilty of an offense during the conflict would serve no more than 2 years. Now that the British government is proposing unilaterally changing that part of the agreement, as this is making its way through the House of Lords, what can Americans do? Is there anything that we can do and anyone we can contact to say loud and clear, we're watching you try to break international law and break treaties that we helped create, and we're not going to let you get away with this? What might we be able to do?
Yeah, well, that's a very good summation of what the legislation does and how insulting it is to the memory of people who've been killed on all sides, whether it was by state actors or non-state actors. But I think just to reflect on what this actually means, that there was a court case 2 weeks ago in which a British soldier was found guilty for the killing of a guy called Aidan McAnesby in 1988. Now, Aidan had been walking through a static checkpoint that he walked through every day, and every day he walked through that checkpoint, he was abused by the British soldiers. And one day in 1988, he was shot dead. And it has taken 34 years for that family to get justice. The whole way along the line, the family were stalled, they were frustrated, and information and evidence was held back. So it has a huge impact on individual families, and it has a huge impact in terms of the process of reconciliation. If these issues aren't addressed, if they are not acknowledged, if the truth isn't put forward, if all of the information relating to these cases aren't put in the public domain, they fester. And as I say, if that family's taken 34 years to get justice for the killing of their brother and their son and their uncle, Aidan, and his parents are both dead. They didn't get the chance to see it. Eilish, his sister, who started the campaign and kept it going through the early years, is now gone. But his nieces and nephews and his other brothers can see this, and there's a bit of victory. So it's important, not just to families, but it's important to society that the truth is known about all of the actions that happened. The truth is out there and acknowledged. And what this legislation does, as you've outlined, it stops families accessing the courts. It'll be illegal. It'll be illegal blocking them and trying to take legal actions against the state and uncover some of this. It stops inquests and stops full investigations. So it's a piece of legislation which is hugely insulting, outside of the terms of Good Friday Agreement, undermines reconciliation, and must be stopped. And that's not just our opinion, as you said. That is the opinion of all of the parties. This is an action that the Irish government are opposed to, and the British government have unilaterally pushed. And it's down to one thing, and they've made it clear. They have a manifesto commitment that they do not want to see any British soldiers or British military or any British politicians in the dock for their actions during the conflict.
And that's a Tory party manifesto plank, essentially.
Oh, yep, that was written into their election manifesto, and so they are putting the needs of their own party and the cover up for their actions of their military above all other elements of the Good Friday Agreement and protecting the rights of citizens and also the whole concept of reconciliation. So that legislation has went through. The British government haven't pulled off it. The legislation is fatally flawed and it cannot be amended to bring it back into line with the Good Friday Agreement. That's not my view. Well, sorry, it is my view, but it's not only my view. That's the view of the Commissioner for Human Rights, who's appointed by the British government in the North, and that is the view of human rights practitioners and parties and even all of the churches. So what can be done? The first thing to be done is we need to get the British government to withdraw this legislation. It is in the House of Lords. We need to be in touch with the House of Lords. Irish America needs to be raising these issues with individual lords to get them to stall or push for the British government to remove this. And there is an alternative. The alternative was agreed in 2014 in Stormont House, with all parties and both governments signed up to. And that would be a victim-centered approach, which would allow for the recovery of information, could allow for justice, could allow for supports. That was there, and that was endorsed just as late as January 2020, where the British government agreed to that. And then they unilaterally stepped aside. So, and what was really interesting in the presentation of this, the Lord who was introducing this by the British government, a guy called Lord Quinn, tried to create this case to say the British government had no other option to do this because there was no consent on the way forward or consensus on the way forward. There was a consensus. It was a Stormont House. There's no consensus, absolutely no consensus or support for these proposals, and yet the British government are pushing ahead with them. So we need Irish America to be in touch with their political leaders. We need political leaders in touch with the lords. We need civic society to be in touch with lords. We need people involved in human rights and legal matters to be involved with the lords to say this shouldn't proceed. This needs to be thrown out completely.
Yeah. So contacting any representative in your state, in your local government, as well as any legal organization you may be a member of or be party to speak up loud and clear, saying this is not, you're not sneaking this by. We're all watching this.
And the US gets the view that it's ingrained in the culture. It's written on I think it's actually written on the Supreme Court. All are equal before the law.
Yeah.
And this is quite the opposite. This is saying that there's one law for the British military and there's one law for everybody else.
Yeah, rooted in a political party's, like you say, manifesto. Not in pursuit of a model of justice or anything. Yeah.
So, I mean, I suppose one thing is that there's an urgency to get this legislation removed before it does any further damage.
Yeah.
And slows down the process of truth reconciliation and truth recovery and reconciliation. Because I'm always hopeful and I'm always very mindful of people like Ian McAnespy's family, who despite every obstacle was thrown up against them, they never stopped, they never backed down, they never stalled, they pushed ahead and eventually got to an element of truth and justice.
Yeah, and justice. Yeah, it's worth working towards, and we need to speak up to be clear that this is not the way forward. If it's okay to move into issues of the protocol of executive formation of where the government is.
Yeah, so yet again, I mean, a lot of this comes down to unilateral actions by the British government. The peace process was successful 24 years ago, getting the Good Friday Agreement on the basis of both governments, all parties coming to the table, or the majority of parties coming to the table, and international opinion, where it was Canada, the US, or the EU overseeing the process. So that multilateralism was the basis of it. And we see unilateral actions. So in terms of the North, we have been without government since the elections of May of this year, when Sinn Féin became the largest party. Our party vice president, Michelle O'Neill, became the first minister elect. And the historic significance of that is worth noting.
Yeah.
And that it is that the North was designed that wouldn't happen. When the
To
North,
prevent that entirely. Yeah.
so we have an Irish Republican Party as the largest party, and one of the leaders of that party being the First Minister, the first non-unionist since partition. And that 100 years ago, when Ireland was divided, the North was gerrymandered to be 66% Protestant and 100% Unionist, and that's no longer the case.
Yeah.
Protestantism is, I think it's 46%, and Catholicism is 44 and 47%.
Yeah.
And there's no Unionist majority anymore. It's a shared place, and it's a better place than it was since partition, but it can be better if we realise the democratic rights of people to vote.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So all of these issues we're dealing with those fundamental changes in the North. And what the British government brought forward this week was a piece of legislation. So we've been without a government since the May election. By the current rules and laws, there was to be an election in mid-December, early January.
That was the terms agreed in January 2020. Here's how we'll have an election, and if those elected are not in place doing the work of government in 6 months' time, December 15th will be when we have to do a new election. That was not like, what do we do? It was black and white.
Oh yeah, it was an agreement, and it was legislated for Westminster. So the British government then changed the laws and changed the rules, so that their new legislation is they've set a cut-off date for the 13th of April now for the next election.
Unilaterally deciding to move from December 15th to April 13th? Is that?
Well, it was their actions. We hadn't supported it. It was on the basis of, we says the laws were there and they needed to be adhered to.
Yeah.
The Irish government called for it, and it was all in this notion about, and this is a thing that I find troublesome. Well, the argument was the least worst option was to not have an election. That it's almost like democracy's an inconvenience.
Exactly right.
Which and also it sets a precedent that the British government cannot, of their own volition, can change the dates of an election. So, although there's an outline date for the 13th of April, our cutoff date for the 13th of April, they've just shown over the past week that they can move that and change that as they please. So I think that, as I say, I'm always very, very cautious when people say we shouldn't have an election because it will make things worse.
Yeah,
that should be a red light for Democrats.
Exactly right. I'm curious. The British government appears to be motivated to make these changes and to act in a way that undermines the people's voice and democratic principles at the request of the DUP. And the DUP is saying, let's wait. Right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, the DUP and the Irish government as well, I think it's worth reflecting the day it called for it. And again, it comes back to, if you follow their logic or follow their view on it, it was a case that they believed that you could buy time and find an agreement of the outstanding issues of Brexit and the protocol.
Keep the clock running in between.
Which might sound like a good idea, but there's no indication of any strategy or policy change by the British government which will bring you to the point of resolving those issues. There's no indication in the British government having says how they will get the DUP to stop blocking government formation, even if a deal is struck. So they've put back the elections, and it's quite clear there doesn't seem to be any strategy other than almost hit and hope. Put it back and hopefully something will sort itself out. Yeah. This is a government who's in charge of the negotiations. This is a government who claims the sovereignty over the North. And this is a government who has, for the past 2 years, since the Irish Protocol was introduced, has pandered and promoted and provided political cover for the objections of the DUP.
Is there precedent for this? Has the British government jumped to the tunes of the DUP so clearly in the past? And what can we learn about that? If that has happened in the past?
Well, there has been instances, yes, where they have acted on behalf of the DUP, particularly when the DUP during the Theresa May government, whenever they were reliant on the DUP votes.
Yeah.
And as I say, over the past 2 years, on the protocol issue, have provided that cover. And the British government's relationship with the DUP has become, they will portray it almost like the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
They had declared that any agreement reached had to have the agreement of both elements of society in the North, Unionists and Nationalists. they don't provide the same principle when you're dealing with legacy. They're just cutting their own furrow on that one. And if they're setting that precedent, does that mean the executive in the North would have a veto over all British government foreign policy and trade issues? Because there's a majority of people in the majority of the people in the Northern Assembly supports the protocol. So I would call all that out. I think it fits within the Brexit mentality of some people in the Tory parties to keep this going, and that's why it suits. But ultimately, the British government, despite the obligation on them in the Good Friday Agreement to be rigorously impartial, has made it clear that they're a pro-unionist government.
Yeah, and this ties into the protocol question next, because ostensibly the reason why there's no a path forward is because the DUP is unhappy with the terms of the protocol, the negotiated way to handle Brexit, essentially, right? That's kind of the sticking point. It is probably clearer that they refuse to sit in government with Michelle O'Neill as the First Minister, which is probably the real issue, right? They claim it's the lack of progress in the protocol. What do we see? Do we see a British government hard at work, really engaged with the EU to figure out a path forward? Is there any hope in that direction?
Well, over the past 2 years, there hasn't been, I suppose, and everybody clutches to an element of hope on some of these situations. There has been a change in tone since Richie Sunak came into office over Liz Truss and over Boris Johnson. And remember, the protocol wasn't imposed on the British government. It wasn't imposed on the North. The protocol was agreed by Boris Johnson and this Tory government as being the way forward. And within weeks of it being signed, they started undermining and opposing it and blocking it. And we all remember the infamous piece where a British Secretary of State got up and says that they were bringing forward legislation which would breach this international agreement in a limited fashion. And I'm not so sure legally how the idea, if you end up in front of a court saying to the judge, I did break the law, but it was only in a
light treason.
It was only in a limited format. So that's been the tail of it. To date, there has been no indication of any change in policy on behalf of the British government on the protocol and their position on it. And in fact, they have another piece of legislation unilaterally again opposed by the Irish government, opposed by the majority of parties in the North, opposed by Europe, and it's called the Brexit bill. And the British government are going to give themselves the power to unilaterally break the international agreement on the Irish protocol and the withdrawal agreement from the EU. And this week, actually, the EU let out, if that was to happen, they let out the legal framework of consequences, including trade tariffs that would be imposed for breaching those agreements. So you could see, if the British government don't change the position, is you will end up, one, having a hard Brexit in the end of Ireland. You'll have broken international agreements, and you will have an intensification of a trade conflict between the EU and Britain. All due to the actions of Britain not are refusing to implement the agreements. Yeah,
and it certainly undermines the promise of let's kick it down the field and buy more time, so we have more time to work out a negotiated path forward, right?
I think any independent observer, somebody standing outside the box, and I have to explain this stuff to people, and they go, but that makes no sense. Surely it's in Britain's interest to have this. So Brexit never made any sense. Brexit was never in the British interest. It was definitely never in Ireland's interests, North or South. But they went ahead with it. So you would hope and believe that Britain at some stage will see their senses and come to an agreement and implement that agreement with the EU. And they have created a space to get that done. And there's no indication today that there's been a change in policy. They've announced no position. They have said that they would like a negotiated agreement, but they've also said if they don't get it, they will go ahead with this piece of legislation and empower themselves to unilaterally change it.
Yeah.
So could you imagine getting into a negotiation and someone says,
Before we begin, I want to make sure we know.
I would like to agree. I'm going to buy your car. I'd like to agree the price, but if you don't agree to my price, I'm setting it and I'm taking the car with me.
Exactly. Before we enter this negotiation, I want to make sure you understand I'm only going to agree to whatever I say and nothing that you say. Legally,
So there's been no change in that negotiating position. We hopefully there will be. It'll be in Britain's interest. It's definitely in Ireland's interest to have a negotiated agreement. It's definitely in Ireland, North and South, and to smooth the relationships between Britain and the EU, between Ireland North and South, and between Britain and the USA. But again, I come back to the point. That's the sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
There's been no sense to
no evidence that that's the path they'll see. And I think zoomed out, that provided a pretty good pause there. You know, a lot of this is at 30,000 foot level trying to make a very bad idea work. That's where all of these problems start to present themselves. You can't make a very bad idea work, and then when you try, this is the result.
Yeah, it's time to put down the shovel and stop digging.
Exactly right. Exactly. Well, I'm so grateful to you for your time again, Kieran. Thank you for during a very busy time, in spite of the holidays, taking time and sitting down and updating us all about what's going on and where we can continue to raise our voice and stay informed and be an active participant in the work that's going on. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and Greg, it's great to be here. Hopefully, towards the end of the year, just as a catch up.
Exactly right. A year-end wrap-up would be great.
And probably it'd be better if we agree not to coordinate our jumpers anymore, in case people think
it's all part of the plan.
We had for people who know Irish politics, we're not blue shirts and we're not blue sweaters.
All right, Kieran, thank you so much, and have a wonderful Christmas and Happy New Year, and we'll talk to you before the end of the year for a year-end wrap-up.
Okay, no worries.
Thank you.
All right, great. Take it easy.
Thanks. Bye-bye.